Welcome to Muffin Talk.
Kia ora and welcome to Muffin Talk. This program is brought to you by the initiative Titipounamu, Study and Joy. Waitangi Day, Te Rā o Waitangi in Māori, was first celebrated in 1934 and was made a national public holiday for Aotearoa New Zealand in 1974. The day marks the anniversary of the initial signing of the Treaty of Waitangi on the 6th of February in 1840. How did it come to this event? And what does it mean for us today? In an interview recorded with Kevin McBride some years ago, we addressed these questions. At the time, Kevin McBride led the bicultural desk in the Catholic Diocese of Auckland. Here are some snippets of that interview.
I think the Māori had been settled here for many hundreds of years before any other people visited. And during that time, they had, if you like, modified the culture that they brought from across the Pacific, in fact, from the eastern seaboard of Asia. And they modified that to develop a strong and settled and cultured and civilized occupation of this land. So that I think has to be the starting point. The second thing I think which is very important relating to the history of the treaty is that there was a lot of Māori initiative in the development of what eventually became the treaty. I think the first thing is the initiative relating to Pākehā visitors. Māori travelled with them to various places, including Australia, and they had a lot to do there with missionaries like Samuel Marsden.
Just for the non-New Zealanders, Pākehā are the European immigrants.
I think the relationship with Samuel Marsden was typical of relationships that Māori were taking with people that they came across in their visits around the world. That's the second point. I think the third point is that out of those relationships came a visit to England by two very important chiefs of the north, Hongi and Waikato. They met with King George, and they got on very well together. And there were a lot of exchanges and interest in history and so on. Later on, as settlers came here, there was and started to have an impact on Māori society. There was a letter written in 1831 which asked King George to do something about the settlers, or I think it might have been King William at that stage. And that led, first of all, to the establishment of a British resident, James Busby, here. And in relationships with James Busby, Māori, first of all, established a trading flag for themselves in 1834. And even more importantly, in 1835, a document was developed called Te Wakaputanga, or Te Rangatiratanga, or Nuutereni, the Declaration of Independence or Sovereignty of New Zealand. And this was done with the help of James Busby, but it also brought together, to my mind, a lot of thinking that Māori themselves had been doing about relationships with Pākehā. And that document, He Whakaputanga, I think is the real constitutional foundation of New Zealand, because it established New Zealand as an international entity, or Aotearoa as it was, or Nuutereni it was called in the document, an international entity. And it was on that foundation that the Treaty of Waitangi eventually developed.
So at that time, were there two flags?
That time there was only the one flag, of course. Well, there was the flag, the so-called independence flag, which I think not many people know about. It's not flown very often, but it has it's a white background with a red cross on it, and up in the top right-hand corner on a blue background are 4 stars. And so that was the actual flag of this country in 1834, and that was the flag that was represented at the signing of the treaty in 1840. So there was a lot of background to the treaty, which I think not all New Zealanders know about, but it's of critical importance when we actually come to look at the treaty itself.
And what makes the treaty so special for New Zealanders, but maybe also worldwide?
If I could just say a little bit more about that Whakaputanga, the sovereignty document, I think that document actually set the authority of the rangatira, the leaders of tribes in New Zealand, that set that authority in place. And so when it came to the signing of the treaty itself is actually based on it and mentions in the preamble and the first article that document. Now, going back to its importance as a document, I think it's a case of an initiative which is perhaps brought to Maori people, but it's an attempt, a genuine effort by Maori to share their land with outsiders. I think that's the importance of it.
So it's about sharing the land. It's not taking over or anything
Definitely
like
not.
that.
No,
Yeah.
and the language of Te Tiriti, the actual document in Māori language that was signed by the rangatira and by Hobson, the language of that makes it very, very clear that this is, and first of all, the second article, I should say, affirms what is in the declaration. The rangatiratanga is affirmed very clearly. The first article actually grants a limited authority to the British Crown in the form of the governor and of course representing the Queen, and that limited authority was so that the settlers could actually be looked after by their own leaders. It gave the authority of the leaders of the British Crown to actually have some ability to look after their own people.
But also the leaders of the European settlers and the leaders of the Maori tribes, they were standing on the same level when the treaty was signed, which is quite different to many other countries.
There's a very interesting finding by the Waitangi Tribunal, and that particular finding shows clearly what was in the mind of the signatories, the major signatories at that time, and that was that they were willing to grant something out of the declaration, kawanatanga, a function of government. They were willing to grant that to the Queen and her officers to manage their own people. Mm-hmm. And so it's an interesting attempt on a worldwide basis of two peoples to actually find a way of sharing the resources of a land.
Kevin, we've heard a little bit about the Waitangi Day and the Treaty of Waitangi now. Mm-hmm. What does this have to do with your work at the bicultural desk?
Thanks. Yes, I think probably some people within the church wonder why this issue is given so much importance, that there is a desk for it. But the Catholic Church is not the only one which has been giving importance. The church was actually present at the signing of the treaty. I think that's the basis. The missionaries like the Anglican missionary Henry Williams and various Methodist missionaries had quite an influence on it. Williams very clearly, but I was found recently that some of the Methodist missionaries had quite an influence on the defining, if you like, intervention before the treaty was signed by Tamati Wakanene, and Wakanene had a lot to do with the Methodists, so there's no doubt there was some influence there. And Catholic Bishop Pompallier, of course, was largely responsible for the writing of the fourth article of the treaty, which is about freedom of religion and practice of religion and Māori custom. So the church was there, and I think that's put upon us, on the churches, a need to honour this, what the Māori and many of the churches have stated is a covenantal agreement. It's a very, very strong and very solemn agreement, and some of the language of it is taken, language of these documents is taken from the Bible itself. You know, they say kingi-tanga is a word represented in the Whakaputanga.
It's the kingdom of God.
It's a biblical thing. Mm-hmm. See, kingship and kingi-tanga were not part of Māori understanding. So the fact that these words were used shows their understanding of the Bible, and also, I think, their trust that the church would support them. So we have a strong obligation, if you like, to be part of that.
One of the first contacts was also with the missionaries between the Māori and the Pākehā, the European settlers.
Yeah, the first printing done in the country, much of it was biblical, and so therefore the first language, English language, that many Māori came across was the Bible itself. One of my mentors in this, of course, is Pa Henry Tate, and he's very clear. In fact, he made a statement to the Catholic Diocese in 1999, which is very clear on this, and he says the Church is obligated to uphold the treaty, and the nature of the obligation is to allow the chiefs the capacity to exercise their chieftainship over their lands and habitations and treasured things, and of course that takes in so much. So we, as Church, we have to look that we haven't violated Māori understandings in things like land. So we have the Catholic social teaching and the treaty, the language of the treaty, the things protected. There's a strong affinity there which should draw us as churches and to protect this for as much as we can.
And the Diocese of Auckland is very multicultural. I think it's one of the most multicultural dioceses. And people coming from so many different backgrounds. Do you think there's still a space for the bicultural approach? You now said that there would be a Māori desk, but is that Māori desk then integrated somehow in the multicultural?
Well, first of all, I think it's very difficult to move into multicultural, particularly in this country, without some understanding of bicultural. I think if we can accept the relationship that was hoped for in the treaty, and that there'd be a respectful and relationship between the Māori and Pākehā. If we can get that one in place, it's not so difficult to add on others, if you like, or to develop it. The unfortunate thing, if we rush straight into multicultural, and one is the belittling of the status of Māori in this country. I think, that can be they can, if you like, be just another minority. And fortunately, the need to observe the treaty and its obligations, I think, has remained quite strong. And I think we Pākehā need to get behind Māori, because if we can get that one right, multiculturalism is a much easier step to take. So I think it's still a very, very strong place.
And part of this, the bicultural commitment of the Catholic Church in New Zealand is the celebration of Mass in Te Reo Māori, in Māori language. Māori church song?
Yes, indeed, Māori hymns.
Yeah.
And I think many of us now in Waiheke know more Māori, more Māori on, by heart, because we have it quite frequently.
Aotearoa peace is calling, in the bonds of love we meet, for the world a new day dawning and shining.